Welcome to the Sleepy Heaven. I am your guide, John, and I am delighted to have you here. Today, we will immerse ourselves in a story inspired by the Library of Babel, a place where decisions and reflections teach us to value both the present and the infinite. This story reminds us that we are both the authors and the readers of our lives, and that our choices, though shaped by the infinite, hold the power to shape our narrative. It encourages us to reflect on our connection to something greater and to find peace in the mystery of the universe. Relax, take a deep breath, and let the serenity of this narration guide you on a journey of discovery and balance.
Close your eyes and take a deep breath. Feel the rise and fall of your chest as life flows through you. Imagine yourself in a vast space. Here, in this moment, you don't need to seek definitive answers. Simply breathe and allow the connection between your thoughts and the universe to naturally reveal itself. Let the serenity of the present embrace you. Acknowledge that, while the past and the future are woven into your narrative, the now is where everything converges. This instant is your anchor, where infinite possibilities meet the certainty of your existence. Accept that you don't need to control every detail of your path. Instead, trust that each step is meaningful and that, like in a vast labyrinth, even the unexpected turns have purpose. In this moment, in this infinite stillness, allow yourself to simply be. No expectations, no burdens, just you. Rest in the truth of your fullness, in the comfort of this sacred space you've created. Here, under the stars, is where our journey toward peace begins. Breathe deeply and let it all go. In a forgotten corner of the universe, beyond the known stars, lay the infinite library. Since the first explorers ventured into its endless hexagons, the library became the center of the strangest legends and the object of many obsessions. It was said that its galleries contained everything ever written and everything that could be imagined. Valeria, a young woman with an inquisitive mind, had heard of the library since childhood. In the tales her grandfather told her, he always mentioned a special book, the perfect catalog, a tome that revealed the exact location of every book in the library's vastness. According to her grandfather, it could grant unimaginable power to whoever possessed it. However, he also warned that the search for this book had driven countless souls to madness. When Valeria turned 24, she decided to embark on her own expedition. The maps she had collected were fragmented and contradictory, but they all agree on one point: access to the library was hidden in a valley surrounded by mountains of perpetual mist. The mountains, with their peaks veiled in white, seemed like natural walls guarding ancient secrets. With a bag full of provisions, a lantern, and an old notebook to document her journey, Valeria reached the described location. The echo of her steps on the rocky ground resonated in the void, a harbinger of what was to come. Before her stood a black iron door engraved with incomprehensible markings, a blend of archaic runes and geometric patterns that seemed to flow hypnotically under the dim twilight. A faint vibration emanated from the structure, as if the library itself were breathing. Without hesitation, Valeria pushed the door, its hinges emitting a deep groan that faded into the vastness. As she crossed the threshold, the light from outside was replaced by a constant dimness, illuminated only by glowing orbs suspended in the air. These orbs, the size of apples, floated without visible support, emitting a warm glow that barely dispelled the shadows. The first gallery she encountered was hexagonal, just as the stories described. Every wall was lined with shelves that reached the ceiling, and in the center was a well with a metal railing. Looking down, Valeria felt an unfathomable vertigo. The well descended through countless floors, each with its own hexagon. A soft, icy breeze rose from the depths, brushing her face and carrying the scent of old paper and aged wood. The books on the shelves were as varied as imagination itself. Some were enormous leather-bound volumes with spines embossed in gold letters that glowed under the orb's light, while others were small, simple notebooks with covers worn by time. Many had incomprehensible titles, while others bore no markings at all. Valeria picked a book at random. Its pages contained rows of characters that seemed meaningless, but one phrase stood out on the first page: "One who seeks must be prepared to find the unexpected." She continued exploring. In some hexagons, she found rudimentary beds and dust-covered tables, some with cracked cups still bearing stains from a dark, dried liquid. The thought that others had been there before filled her with a mix of fear and curiosity. In the distance, amid the silence, she could hear the echo of footsteps, though she couldn't discern if they were real or a product of her imagination. After hours of walking, Valeria discovered a spiral staircase. The iron structure, rusted in places, twisted upward and downward, vanishing into infinite darkness. She decided to descend, convinced that the answers lay hidden in the depths. Step by step, the sound of her boots echoed like a drum, accompanying her solitary quest. The air grew denser and colder as she descended, and the shadows seemed to become more tangible. Finally, she reached a gallery unlike the others. Its walls were adorned with mirrors that reflected her figure from impossible angles. The mirrors appeared to move subtly, distorting her image in a hypnotic game that forced her to look away. In the center of the room, on a crystal pedestal, lay an open book. The pages seemed to glow faintly, as if alive. Valeria approached cautiously. The text contained a single line: "Knowledge comes at a price." At that moment, Valeria felt that everything she had known until then was irrelevant. The library was not just a repository of books, but a living entity, a labyrinth of hidden meanings and intellectual traps. Her adventure had barely begun, yet she could already feel the weight of infinity crushing her thoughts. The echoes of the word price resonated in her mind, as if the room itself whispered veiled secrets. With a mix of fascination and fear, she closed the book and prepared to continue her search. The promise of the perfect catalog shone in her mind like a beacon, guiding her through the chaos. After leaving the Hall of Mirrors, Valeria continued her descent down the spiral staircase. Each step felt heavier, as if the library itself was imposing an invisible weight upon her shoulders. The walls of the hexagon she passed began to change, no longer lined solely with books. They were now engraved with inscriptions carved into the stone, messages in languages too ancient to decipher. On one level, Valeria noticed something peculiar: A series of inscriptions repeated a similar pattern, but upon closer inspection, each version differed by a single symbol or an additional line. She paused to study one of the clearest engravings. Although she couldn't understand its meaning, she felt a strange connection to the text, as if the words were alive and observing her. In the midst of her reflection, a sound broke the silence, a low, constant murmur emanating from the depths. At first, she thought it was the echo of her own footsteps, but she soon realized the voices were forming words, entire phrases in a language she could almost understand. Curiosity drove her to follow the sound, leading her to a gallery unlike any she had seen before. This new room was circular, a radical departure from the hexagons she had grown accustomed to. The shelves curved along the shape of the room, creating a hypnotic effect. In the center stood a lectern carved from black marble, upon which rested an open book. Valeria approached cautiously, recalling the warning from the previous text, "Knowledge comes at a price." The pages of the book glowed with their own light, and the words seemed to shift as she looked at them, as if the texts were adapting to her presence. With an almost inaudible whisper, the book began to tell a story, but it wasn't just any story. It was the story of Valeria. From her childhood to the exact moment she had entered the library, details only she knew were revealed with terrifying clarity. Unable to look away, she continued reading as the pages turned on their own, as if the book knew when she had absorbed each word. When she finally closed the tome, Valeria felt a shiver run down her spine. How could a book contain her life with such precision? More importantly, who had written it? As she struggled to process what she had just experienced, she realized the murmuring continued, but now it seemed to come from all directions. "What do you seek, traveler?" The voice, clear and deep, came from a figure that had appeared on the far side of the room. It was an older man, dressed in a gray robe that blended with the shadows. In his hands, he held a staff adorned with intricate carvings. "I seek the perfect catalog," Valeria replied without hesitation. She knew she couldn't afford to show weakness. The man smiled faintly, though his eyes remained serious. "Many have come here with the same mission. Some search for years, others for an eternity. None have returned with it," he said. His voice carried an ambiguous tone, as if he took some pleasure in testing the determination of travelers. "If no one has succeeded, why are you here?" Valeria asked, crossing her arms. The man let out a brief laugh. "Because my task is not to find the catalog, but to ensure that those who seek it do not destroy the library in the process." A knot formed in Valeria's stomach. The man's words seemed to carry a deeper meaning, but before she could ask, he turned and vanished into the shadows. The murmuring ceased instantly, leaving an overwhelming silence in the room. With no other choice but to press on, Valeria returned to the spiral staircase. This time, her descent was faster, driven by a mix of fear and determination. As she descended, the walls of the library seemed to vibrate faintly, as though alive. Each hexagon she passed grew darker than the last, and the air became increasingly heavy. Finally, She reached a level where the shelves were empty and the walls were lined with dark mirrors that did not reflect her image. The space felt abandoned, as though it were disconnected from the rest of the library. At the center of this room stood a golden door engraved with glowing inscriptions that seemed to move under the beam of her lantern. Valeria reached out toward the door, her heart racing. She knew that crossing it would take her quest in a direction from which there would be no return. Taking a deep breath, she pushed, allowing the darkness on the other side to envelop her completely. When Valeria crossed the golden door, she found herself in a gallery that defied all comprehension. Gravity seemed altered, books floated at varying heights, spinning slowly as though suspended in an invisible fluid. The air was heavy, imbued with the scent of ancient parchment and rusted metal. The curved, gleaming walls reflected flickers of light that appeared to come from nowhere in particular. Ahead, a giant pendulum clock swung with a hypnotic rhythm, as if marking not only the passage of time but also the heartbeat of a greater will encompassing everything. Its movement evoked the sensation that time in this place did not follow common rules but was intertwined with space and the essence of the library itself. Its ticking resonated through the space, steady like a heartbeat. Each swing sent ripples through the air, distorting nearby objects. At the clock's base were strange engravings that shifted when Valeria tried to decipher them. She couldn't help but wonder if time itself was being manipulated in this place. As she moved forward, her boots barely touched the floor. Each step produced a soft echo, as though the gallery absorbed part of the sound. The floating books were written in languages she had never seen, and though she couldn't comprehend their meaning, some words seemed to project themselves into her mind, leaving behind a fleeting sense of understanding. In the center of the gallery, a hooded figure waited beside a circular table. The table's surface was made of crystal so transparent it seemed to vanish, but as Valeria approached, she noticed it held hundreds of tiny hourglasses. Each one contained sands of different colors, flowing at varying speeds, as though representing distinct realities or destinies. "I knew you would come here," said the figure without looking up. Their voice was calm yet firm, resonating through the space as if coming from every direction. This is the point where time converges. Each hourglass tells a story. Some narrate entire lives, others a single crucial moment. Do you know which one is yours? Valeria shook her head but couldn't take her eyes off the hourglasses. One in particular caught her attention, an hourglass whose sands constantly changed color, shifting from gold to black, then red, and finally white. There was something hypnotic about its movement, as though it held the key to something essential. "Your story is not yet fully written," the figure continued. "But every decision you make affects the flow of these sands. Even now, as you watch, time adjusts to reflect your choices." Valeria felt a mixture of fear and fascination. "How can I know if I'm making the right decision?" "You can't," the figure replied. "Absolute knowledge is a burden no one can bear. But the library watches, and in its infinite galleries, there is always an answer waiting to be found." With a gesture, the figure indicated a path that extended beyond the table. Valeria felt a force pushing her forward, as though the space itself conspired to guide her. As she moved ahead, the sound of the pendulum clock faded, replaced by absolute silence. The new section of the gallery was narrower, with shelves that seemed to lean toward her, as if the books were eager to reveal their secrets. In one corner, she found an open book resting on an obsidian lectern. Its pages were blank, but as she approached, words began to form, written by an invisible hand. Time is a spiral, not a line, the text read. What you seek can only be found if you understand that the beginning and the end are one and the same. Valeria reached out to touch the page, but an energy repelled her. She realized the book was not meant to be touched, only understood. Closing her eyes, she let the words resonate in her mind, forming connections she had never imagined. When she opened her eyes, the gallery had transformed once more. Now she stood before an enormous crystal door, so clear it almost blended into the air. On its surface, pulsating lights formed an intricate map of interwoven and diverging paths. Valeria knew that crossing this door was the next step, but she also understood that each choice brought her closer to or further from her ultimate destination. Taking a deep breath to summon her courage, she stepped into the unknown as the echo of her own breath faded into the vastness.
Valeria felt a shiver run down her spine as she crossed the crystal door. On the other side, she found a gallery unlike any she had ever seen. The walls were made of an organic substance that seemed to breathe, contracting and expanding in a slow, steady rhythm. The gallery had no visible shelves or books. Instead, translucent panels covered the walls, pulsing with a faint light that shifted in color to the beat of a low, resonant sound like the thrum of a heartbeat. At the center of the room stood a pedestal carved from a black, glossy stone resembling obsidian. Atop it floated a luminous sphere, spinning slowly and emitting a soft hum. Valeria approached cautiously, watching as the sphere projected small images into the air, fragments of landscapes, faces, and words in unfamiliar languages. It was as if the sphere were gathering scattered memories from across the library. "Welcome to the living archive," said a gentle, feminine voice that seemed to emanate from the very walls. Valeria stepped back in surprise, searching for the speaker, but she saw no one. Here, not only books but also experiences, thoughts, and emotions of all who have traversed the library are stored. Every visitor leaves a trace, and those traces become part of the archive. Are those traces permanent? Valeria asked, stepping closer to the pedestal again. "Nothing here is permanent," the voice replied. "The archive is in constant flux, reflecting the flow of life itself. But the most meaningful stories, those that leave an indelible mark, remain longer, resonating like echoes through the ages." Valeria watched as one of the projected images shifted, revealing a familiar scene, her own face reflected in the library's entrance moments before crossing the threshold. "Is it recording my story as well?" she asked. "Every step you take becomes part of the archive," the voice confirmed. "Your journey is unique, yet intertwined with the stories of those who came before and those who will come after. Valeria felt a mixture of awe and unease. The living archive was more than a mere record, it was a mirror reflecting the very essence of existence. As she gazed at the projected images, one in particular caught her eye, a hooded figure walking through an endless corridor, holding a black book with golden inscriptions. The same book appeared repeatedly in different scenes, always in the hands of various people. "That book, what is it?" she asked, pointing to the image. "It is the Codex of Ties," the voice explained. "Its origin is shrouded in mystery, but it is said to have been created by the library's first guardians as a map of the connections between all stories and their protagonists. Its purpose is to reveal the hidden patterns linking the library's events, though some believe it also holds the key to understanding the very nature of infinite knowledge. No one who has found it has returned to confirm its secrets." Valeria felt a renewed sense of purpose. "Where can I find it?" "The archive does not offer direct answers," the voice replied, with a tone almost compassionate. "But if you seek the Codex, you must follow the images that guide you. Each projection is a clue, but also a reflection of what lies within you. The key is in your interpretation." Valeria watched as the images shifted again. Now a labyrinth of hexagons appeared, its corridors twisting and turning at impossible angles, forming an intricate pattern that defied conventional geometry. The walls of the passages seemed crystalline, reflecting lights and shadows that created the illusion of constant motion. Tiny fragments of text floated in the air, as if words had detached from books and were searching for a new home. At the labyrinth center, a light pulsed rhythmically. Without hesitation, Valeria turned on her heels, seeking an exit from the gallery, guided by the vision. As she moved, the organic walls of the gallery seemed to whisper, as though the living archive was watching her every move. At last, she found an opening that led to a narrow corridor. As she stepped inside, she felt the atmosphere change again, the air grew cooler, and shadows danced in rhythm with a distant light. Valeria knew her quest had just become far more complex. But she also understood that each step brought her closer to the answers she sought. Taking a deep breath, she pressed onward, letting the living archive record every moment of her journey.
The hallway Valeria had entered was unlike any she had seen before. It was illuminated by floating lights, as if fragments of stars had been caught in an eternal dance. The walls, made of a reflective, gleaming material, mirrored these lights in an infinite interplay of glimmers. With each step, Valeria could hear the echo of her thoughts, as though the space amplified her mind. As she moved forward, she realized the hallway had no clear end. Each time she thought she was nearing an exit, it vanished like a mirage. "This place is playing with me," she murmured, a mix of frustration and fascination swelling within her. Then, to her right, an oval door began to materialize. It was translucent, and on its surface, constantly shifting patterns seemed to form living scripts. Valeria reached for the door, but it disappeared just before her fingers touched it. In its place, a voice resonated in her mind. Only those willing to embrace all possibilities may pass. The words made her pause, contemplating their meaning. Finally, she closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and stepped forward. When she opened her eyes, she stood in a circular room. The walls were covered with clocks, yet these were not ordinary clocks. Some had no hands, others appeared to run backward, and some glowed faintly. At the center of the room was a pedestal holding an intricately designed compass. Its markers did not point to cardinal directions, but to concepts: fate, free will, eternity, and change. Intrigued, Valeria approached the compass. When she touched it, the object reacted to her presence, spinning rapidly. Suddenly, it stopped, and the marker pointed to change. A new voice, distinct from the earlier one, filled the room. Change is the only constant. What you seek lies in a place where everything is in motion. Before she could fully grasp the words, the walls of the room began to dissolve, revealing an entirely new landscape. She stood on a vast plain where the ground was made of small, mosaic-like tiles that shifted colors and positions constantly, as if alive. Above her, the sky stretched in warm and cool hues, blending into a perpetual sunrise and sunset. In the distance, Valeria saw a figure moving. It didn't walk, but floated slightly above the mosaics. Determined, she began to follow. As she advanced, she noticed that each step she took rearranged the ground beneath her feet, creating fleeting patterns that seemed to tell stories. The voice's words echoed in her mind, "Everything is in motion." When she finally reached the figure, it stopped and turned toward her. It was an ethereal woman, her hair floating as if underwater. Her eyes, a luminous silver, seemed to see beyond the visible. "Valeria," the woman said, her voice both near and distant, "you have reached the threshold of possibilities. Here, every choice carries weight, and every path branches into infinite destinies." "I seek the codex of ties," Valeria replied firmly. The woman smiled faintly. "The codex is not a fixed object. It is an idea, a representation of how all things are interconnected. If you wish to find it, you must accept that its form will change based on what you bring with you." Valeria nodded. "I'm ready to accept whatever is necessary." The woman raised her hand, and the landscape began to transform. The mosaics rose into the air, forming a spiral structure that extended toward the sky, bridging the earth and the infinite in a symbolic union of the tangible and the transcendental. The spiral, a universal symbol of evolution and connection, seemed to vibrate with each of Valeria's steps, reflecting her will and doubts in its shifting colors. At the center of the spiral, a light pulsed with growing intensity. "Follow the spiral," the woman instructed. "At its center, you will find what you seek. But remember, what you discover will depend on what you are willing to see." Without hesitation, Valeria began ascending the spiral, feeling each step resonate through her entire being. As she climbed, the lights and colors around her intensified, creating a kaleidoscope of possibilities stretching into infinity. Though she didn't know what awaited her at the top, for the first time on her journey, she felt completely assured that she was on the right path. The spiral led Valeria to a floating platform in the infinite sky. From there, she could see how the floor's mosaics extended in all directions, forming intricate patterns that seemed to pulse to the rhythm of an inaudible music. As she watched, she felt a mix of awe and smallness, as if these mosaics reflected the vastness of the universe and her ephemeral role in it. Each flash of color evoked vague memories, as if reminding her of forgotten fragments of her own existence. Every color and shape brought forth emotions she didn't know she could feel: nostalgia, euphoria, and a profound respect for the cosmos surrounding her. At the center of the platform stood a dark crystal monolith as tall as 10 men. Its surface reflected the landscape but also showed visions of something else: faces, places, and events that seemed to belong to another time. Valeria approached cautiously, watching as the images changed with every step she took. When she reached out to touch the monolith, a deep voice resonated from it. Knowledge is not given, it is earned. Every truth requires a sacrifice. The voice was neutral, as if passing no judgment, but its words carried a weight that made Valeria hesitate. "I am ready," she said, though a knot of uncertainty tightened in her chest. A crack began to form in the monolith, and an intense glow emanated from within. Valeria stepped back as the monolith crumbled into fragments that floated in the air like leaves caught in a whirlwind. The fragments began to orbit around her, each projecting a different image. In one, she saw the ethereal woman she had encountered earlier, this time in a different place, holding a book whose pages appeared to be made of pure light. In another, a man in golden armor walked along a path of fire. Further ahead, a child played by a stream, while an old man watched him from the shadows. "Each fragment is a truth," the voice said again. "But it is also a question. Only one can guide you to what you seek." The fragments began to spin faster, creating a whirlpool of lights and shadows that threatened to overwhelm her. Valeria closed her eyes, allowing her thoughts to calm. When she opened them, one of the fragments floated in front of her, motionless. She took it in her hands, and instantly, her mind was filled with images and sounds. It was a memory, but not hers. It was the memory of a previous traveler, someone who had come to the library seeking the same thing she did. The fragment showed the traveler before a colossal door made of gold and obsidian. Words were etched into its surface in a language Valeria couldn't read, but somehow she understood. "Only those who accept the truth in all its forms may cross," the inscription read. When the memory ended, Valeria felt the fragment fade from her hands. She looked around, but the monolith was no longer there. In its place was a portal made of intertwined light, pulsing with a rhythm that matched the beats of her heart. "This is your threshold," the voice said. "What you find beyond depends on your willingness to accept not just the truth, but the cost it entails." Valeria didn't respond. She knew words were unnecessary at that moment. Without hesitation, she crossed the portal. A feeling of lightness enveloped her as her surroundings shifted once more. She was now in a space with no horizon, where the ground, sky, and air seemed to merge into a single sea of pulsating energy. At the center of this space, a book floated, emitting a warm and steady light. She approached the book with slow steps, each movement filled with anticipation. When she opened it, she discovered that its pages were blank, except for a single word that appeared and disappeared, changing on every page: connection. Valeria realized she wasn't meant to read the book, but to understand it. She closed her eyes and let the word resonate in her mind, allowing it to expand and fill every corner of her consciousness. In that moment, she felt as if the entire universe were connected, every story, every life, and every thought forming part of an infinite whole. When she finally opened her eyes, the light of the book had changed. It was no longer just an object, but an extension of herself, proof that she had accepted the truth and the cost it carried. With renewed determination, Valeria knew that her journey in the library was far from over, but she also knew she had taken a crucial step toward understanding her true purpose. The portal through which she had crossed transported Valeria to an entirely different landscape, where the horizon blurred into golden and silver hues, as if the sky and earth were merging. The air was dense and charged with energy that seemed to vibrate with every thought that crossed her mind, filling her with a sense of awe and caution. The feeling of pulsating energy had disappeared, replaced by an unsettling calm. Valeria now stood on a path that appeared to float in nothingness. On each side of the path, fragments of what seemed to be entire worlds alternated like windows through time and space. There were scenes of cities, vast deserts, and endless forests, all suspended in motion like animated paintings. The path itself was made of an unknown material, transparent yet resilient, and with every step she took, Valeria could see her distorted reflection beneath her feet. It was as if she was not only walking forward, but also inward, toward her own essence. As she advanced, the air filled with a subtle hum. It wasn't chaotic noise, but voices that seemed to speak in harmony, forming words that dissolved before they could be understood. Valeria tried to focus her mind to capture their meaning, but each attempt only left her more confused. Suddenly, a figure appeared on the path. It was a version of herself, but different. Her reflection wore a stern expression and held a closed book with a black cover. "You have reached the moment of choice," said her double, with a voice that sounded like an echo. "Every step you've taken has brought you here, but the path forward is not always about moving ahead." Valeria frowned, not fully understanding the words. "What does that mean?" "The knowledge you seek requires a sacrifice," replied the reflection, extending the book toward her. "What is inside cannot be changed once opened. But the cost is high. You will forget part of who you are to make space for what you need to become." Valeria looked at the book, feeling its invisible weight both calling to her and repelling her at the same time. She knew that the decision she made at that moment would not only determine her future, but also her relationship with the library and with herself. "What happens if I don't open it?" she asked, with a mix of curiosity and fear. "If you don't open it, you will continue wandering the halls of the library, trapped between questions without answers and answers without questions. But if you open it, you will see beyond the limits of what you believe possible. Finally, she gathered her courage and took the book. The cover was cold to the touch, and as she opened it, she found no words, only a reflection of her own memories. It was as if the book were reconstructing her story in real time, pointing out moments she had forgotten or ignored. As she turned the pages, a wave of emotion flooded her. Joy, sadness, regret, and gratitude blended in a whirlwind that left her breathless. Then, on the last page, she saw a phrase that no human being had written: "To move forward, you must first go back." In that instant, Valeria's reflection smiled and began to fade, leaving behind a door that hadn't been there before. The door was simple, made of old wood, with inscriptions that seemed to move as if alive. Valeria knew that this was the next step. When she crossed the door, everything around her changed once again. She was now in a small, cozy room with a single shelf full of books. Each volume, bound in leather of various colors, emitted a faint glow, as if they held fragments of light trapped inside. As she approached, Valeria noticed that each spine carried not only her name but also an emotion written in tiny characters: hope, loss, curiosity. It was as if each book contained not only the facts of her life, but also the meaning those moments had held for her soul. Each one bore her name on the cover. She picked one at random and opened it, discovering that it contained details of her life, but not just the past. It also spoke of a future she had yet to live. The realization struck her with force. The library didn't just hold the knowledge of the universe, it held the knowledge of every soul that had ever existed or would ever exist. She was part of that vast web, and her role, though small, was essential. Valeria placed the book back on the shelf and left the room, ready to face whatever came next. For the first time, she didn't feel fear, but a quiet resolve. She had understood that true knowledge was not in the books or the answers, but in the journey itself. Valeria emerged from the room and found herself in a cavernous space whose vastness defied all logic. The walls were a mosaic of dark mirrors that didn't reflect her image, but rather flashes of other times and places. As she moved forward, a whispering echo began to surround her, as if the room were alive, breathing and observing her with silent attention. The ground beneath her feet was made of smooth, cold black tiles. Every time Valeria took a step, the echo intensified, repeating her movements as if accompanied by invisible footsteps. She looked toward the mirrors, searching for a reflection, but what she saw took her breath away, figures moving beyond the surfaces. They were other travelers, fragments of past and future stories, all coexisting in this room. At the center of the space, an imposing structure rose toward the invisible ceiling, like a pillar between dimensions. Its glass surface seemed to contain entire galaxies, each spinning in patterns that hinted at a hidden order. The structure appeared to be a bridge between the known and the unknown, a tangible manifestation of the endless flow of stories that formed the library. It was a translucent column of glass, within which floated fragments of books, maps, and objects that seemed to rotate slowly in an eternal dance. The light emanating from the column constantly shifted, illuminating the surroundings with hues that ranged from warm to cool, like a compass marking the rhythm of an inaudible melody. Valeria felt the column calling to her. With cautious steps, she approached, feeling the air grow denser as she neared. When she finally stood before it, a voice resonated in her mind. "Welcome to the Hall of Echoes, where the voices of travelers and the whispers of the library converge. What you seek is here, but you can only take it if you understand its meaning." Unsure of what to do, Valeria extended her hand toward the column. Upon touching it, a torrent of images and sounds flooded her mind. It was as if she were experiencing the memories of countless souls, their fears, hopes, mistakes, and triumphs. Each fragment of information intertwined with the next, forming a chaotic yet perfectly ordered tapestry. Among the images, one stood out above the rest, a door carved in stone, surrounded by runes glowing with a blue light, as if they were guardians of an ancient knowledge. The light pulsed rhythmically, evoking a forgotten language Valeria could almost understand, an invitation and a challenge at the same time. Valeria knew instantly that this door was her destiny, the place where the answers she saw were waiting for her. But she also felt an implicit warning. Crossing it would mean leaving behind part of herself. The column released her hand, and Valeria fell to her knees, exhausted by the intensity of the experience. However, within her, a new clarity had emerged. "I understand," she whispered, standing with determination. The echo of her voice seemed to activate something in the room. The mirrors began to vibrate, projecting images of the carved door, guiding her toward it. Valeria followed the projections, each step filled with anticipation and fear. The air grew heavier, as if the room itself tried to stop her. When she finally reached the door, a shiver ran through her body as she observed its details, intricate reliefs of constellations and geometric figures that seemed to move beneath the dim blue light. Each element seemed to tell a story, a visual echo of the countless travelers who had crossed it before. The runes seemed to whisper her name, inviting her to cross, but also warning her of the price she would pay. Valeria closed her eyes, gathering all her courage, and pushed the door open. On the other side, there was neither darkness nor light, but a feeling of infinity. She floated in a space where the rules of time and space seemed to have faded. Before her, a book appeared, floating as if awaiting her arrival. The cover was simple, unadorned, yet it emanated an energy that made it impossible to look away. Valeria extended her hand and took the book. As she opened it, words began to form on its pages, but not in a known language. It was as though the words were pure ideas, communicating directly with her mind. Each page revealed a fragment of her journey, not only in the library, but throughout her entire life. When she reached the last page, a single phrase appeared: "Knowledge is not a destination, but a path." Valeria closed the book and, for the first time, felt that she understood the true purpose of her quest. As the infinite space began to fade, she knew that her journey in the library had not ended, but she also knew she was ready to face it with a new perspective. The transition between the infinite and the new gallery was so smooth that Valeria barely noticed the change. She now found herself in a long, narrow corridor with walls that appeared to be made of polished obsidian, reflecting her figure in distorted ways. The floor was covered with mosaics that changed shape and color with every step she took, forming patterns Valeria couldn't decipher. The air was thick, filled with an unfamiliar scent that simultaneously evoked both tranquility and alertness. At the end of the corridor, barely visible, glowed a faint golden light that pulsed like a heartbeat. Valeria felt that this light was calling her, but she also sensed that the path toward it was fraught with traps. As she moved forward, the walls began to change. The figures reflected in the obsidian were no longer just hers. Other faces appeared, some familiar, others unknown. Each one looked at her with intensity, as if trying to communicate something. Valeria paused for a moment, studying their reflections. One of them, a younger version of herself, smiled and then disappeared, leaving behind a trail of words etched in the glass. What you seek is within you. Valeria continued her path, but now each step felt heavier. The golden light at the end of the corridor seemed closer, yet more distant, as if the space contracted and expanded with each movement. The corridor was no longer just a physical space. It was a reflection of her mind, of her doubts and certainties. Finally, she reached a crossroads. 3 doors stood before her, each different, as if representing various aspects of her life. The first, made of ancient wood carved with engravings that seemed to narrate forgotten stories, emitted a warmth that invited introspection. The second, made of shining metal, reflected her image with an unsettling precision, as if analyzing every corner of her soul. The third, made of rustic stone, marked with scars that seemed like battle wounds, emanated raw strength, as if daring those who dared face it. The first was made of ancient wood, with etched inscriptions that seemed to whisper secrets. The second was made of shiny metal, smooth and flawless, reflecting her image like a mirror. The third was rustic stone, with deep marks that appeared hastily carved. Each door emanated a unique energy, and Valeria knew that the choice she made would determine her path. She approached the wooden door and placed her hand on its surface. Immediately, her mind filled with visions of her past, moments of joy, pain, and learning that had shaped who she was. She then stepped away and approached the metal door. Touching it, a cold sensation enveloped her, showing her fragments of an uncertain future filled with possibilities and risks. Finally, she touched the stone door. Its texture was rough and firm, and the visions she received were neither of the past nor the future, but of a present that confronted her with her own essence. Valeria closed her eyes, trying to process what she had experienced. She knew that none of the doors were wrong, but she also understood that each one would take her down a completely different path. The library will not give me answers, she thought. It only offers me the necessary questions. Finally, she decided to cross the stone door. As she pushed it, she felt resistance, as if the universe itself were questioning her choice. But Valeria did not hesitate. On the other side, she found herself in a circular room illuminated by a light that came from nowhere and everywhere at once. In the center of the room, a mirror floated, suspended in the air, as if caught between dimensions. Its surface not only reflected, but seemed to absorb fragments of light and shadow, creating fleeting patterns that evoked paths Valeria could have taken. It was a symbol of infinite potential and the choices that define existence. Valeria approached the mirror and saw her reflection, but it was not what she expected. The figure in the mirror was her, but also someone else, a version of herself that had made different choices, followed other paths. The mirror didn't just show an image, it showed possibilities. "This is what you are," said a soft voice, "and what you could be. Every choice defines you, but none limits you. In every path you take, you carry with you the shadows of what you could have been and the lights of what you can still become. The true essence of choice is not in what you leave behind, but in how you shape what is yet to come." Valeria extended her hand toward the mirror, and it dissolved into a torrent of light that enveloped her. She felt a deep connection with everything she was and everything she could be. For the first time, she understood that the library was not a place of definitive answers, but a reflection of the infinite complexity of existence. When the light faded, Valeria was back in the corridor, but something had changed. The golden light at the end of the hallway was no longer a mystery. It was a beacon guiding her. With renewed determination, she moved forward, ready to face whatever the next threshold had to offer. The corridor ended in a vast room, seemingly infinite, where the floor and sky merged in a hypnotic play of reflections. Valeria moved cautiously, feeling how each step echoed in a sound that expanded beyond the audible, as if the library itself was taking note of her arrival. At the center of the room, a geometric structure floated, spinning slowly. It was a crystal icosahedron, with each face displaying a fragment of text, a scene, or a thought. Some were incomprehensible, written in languages Valeria had never seen, while others were eerily familiar, fragments of her own memories, desires, and fears. As she approached, the icosahedron stopped spinning, as if it recognized her. A voice resonated in her mind, clearer than any she had heard before. "Welcome to the center of the labyrinth. What lies before you is not an end, but a beginning. Here, all stories converge, including yours." Valeria extended her hand toward one of the faces of the icosahedron, and upon touching it, she was transported to a landscape that wasn't real but felt entirely hers. It was an idealized version of her childhood, a field bathed in the golden light of dawn, where the voices of her family echoed with laughter and warmth. But as she moved forward, the images changed, also showing moments of loss and sacrifice she had faced. The warmth transformed into a reminder of how every joy had been born from a risk taken. "Every story has many faces," the voice said, "but the meaning is for you to choose." The landscape faded, and Valeria found herself back in front of the icosahedron. Another face shone more brightly, calling her. This time, when she touched it, she found herself walking along a path she had rejected years ago. The possibilities of what could have been unfolded before her like an open book, showing her the lives she would have lived had she made different choices. Some were peaceful, others filled with adversity, but all were united by the invisible thread of her ability to choose and transform. Valeria collapsed to her knees, overwhelmed by the weight of infinite possibilities. But at the same time, she felt a clarity she had never experienced before. She understood that the library was not just a place of knowledge, but a reflection of the human ability to imagine, remember, and dream. Valeria also realized that each choice she had made wasn't just an act of free will, but also a response to invisible patterns that seemed to guide her. The idea that everything was predetermined clashed with the sense that her will had driven her search. The library, in its infinity, didn't impose a fixed destiny but offered infinite paths, allowing each traveler to choose how to interpret the signs in the labyrinth of possibilities. The voice returned, softer this time. The Codex of Ties is not a book nor an object. It is the connection between everything that has been and everything that will be. Your journey has not been to find answers, but to understand that you already carried them within you. The structure began to spin again, and Valeria knew the time had come to decide. Before her, a glowing door materialized, its surface rippling like water under the sunlight. There were no runes or inscriptions, only the feeling of pure possibility. Valeria approached the door, her heart beating with a mixture of fear and resolution. She glanced back once more, observing the icosahedron, which now glowed brighter than ever. She knew that by crossing the door, her connection with the library would change forever, but she also understood that it was the inevitable next step in her journey. With one final deep breath, she pushed the door open and found herself in an infinite white space, where there was no time or form. A sense of peace enveloped her as her thoughts dissolved into the fabric of everything. Valeria had transcended the library, becoming part of it, another story intertwined with the infinite narratives of the universe. In that moment, Valeria understood that every reader, every traveler, brought their own version of the story to the library. Her steps didn't end, they simply transformed, leaving footprints that others would follow. The echo of her existence would remain intertwined in future stories, proving that the infinity of the library was not just its size, but its capacity to reflect humanity.